As much as we love the Marvel Cinematic Universe, we have to admit it's not perfect. With each new movie added to our collection, there are certain elements which just don't seem to make sense. Over time, these plot holes add up, but it's possible they'll all be explained at some point during Avengers Endgame. The addition of time travel could send a ripple effect retroactively, making sense of certain scenes that left us scratching our heads. When you sit down to watch a superhero movie, you know you're going to have to suspend your disbelief somewhat. We know it's shocking that films about superpowered human beings aren't completely accurate. Marvel Studios has done a phenomenal job of creating a cinematic universe with established rules, storylines, and characters, while also finding a way to make us care about them. But it seems like each and every time a new movie comes out, there's at least one glaring pothole that doesn't really make sense. Recently, Marvel Studios has been introducing some huge and potentially troublesome concepts into the universe which have the potential to change things forever. Primarily, we're talking about time travel and the idea of multiple alternate timelines. These concepts are ones comic book fans are familiar with, and we know that sometimes they can make things messy. While some of these things could affect the future of the MCU, some of them might also change events which have happened in the past. There's no shortage of theories about how time travel is going to be an important part of Avengers Endgame, but Redditor Hyped Up 80 points out that it could impact the history of the MCU. What if seemingly confusing and nonsensical moments can be retroactively explained with the reveal that time travel played a part? As an example, let's consider this one seemingly nonsensical moment from the movie Doctor Strange. We all know that Dr. Stephen Strange was a brilliant surgeon who lost the dexterity in his hands thanks to a terrible accident. Amazingly, throwing all of his money doesn't fix it, so he's forced to resort to desperate measures. He learns of a man named Jonathan Pangborn, who experienced healing which could only be explained as miraculous. The interaction between Pangborn and Strange prompts Strange to head out in search of Kamar-Taj and the remarkable powers it contains. Strange uses the last of his money to go to Nepal in desperate hopes of finding Kamar-Taj, only to discover the ancient magical training ground isn't exactly on Google Maps, so he decides to wander around for a bit. He eventually gets himself robbed and rather unwisely refuses to give up his watch. This decision could have easily resulted in his demise, but instead, he was rescued by Karl Mordo, who took him to Kamar-Taj. But why? There was an earlier moment when Doctor Strange helped out an injured stray dog. Was that Mordo's justification for not only rescuing Strange, but revealing the location of Kamar-Taj? And then, once Strange gets there, the Ancient One makes a big show of her powers before kicking him out again. Although Mordo seems to be the one who convinces her to accept Strange as a student, it seems like it was all a part of the Ancient One's plan, especially since later on in the movie, she revealed that she had been checking out the future periodically and was only unable to see past the moment of her own demise. Could the Ancient One have set these events in motion because of some knowledge she had of the future? As we mentioned, she claimed not to be able to see past a certain amount of time, but this doesn't mean she was necessarily ignorant of what happened next. If Doctor Strange was able to travel back through time and connect with the Ancient One, then at some point, he could have convinced her to take pity on a poor tourist who couldn't stand to give up his wristwatch. After all, we've seen Doctor Strange master the Time Stone and use it to do some pretty incredible things. In Avengers Infinity War, he used it to check out over 14 million futures, looking for one where our heroes are victorious. Who's to say he didn't make a quick stopover in the past to ensure things pan out a certain way? He could have easily had a chat with the Ancient One at pretty much any moment in time in order to ensure certain actions are taken. And because the Time Stone was inside the Eye of Agamotto, it seems reasonable that the Ancient One would be an important point of contact for Strange, especially if our heroes end up going back in time in order to find the Infinity Stones before Thanos does. It seems somewhat prudent to give the Ancient One a heads up. Otherwise, how are the remaining heroes going to find it during Endgame? And another seemingly interesting plot hole exists with another character who also has the means, motive, and opportunity to travel through time. During the movie Ant-Man, we learned that Scott Lang was a talented thief with a heart of gold. He only stole from criminals, but strangely enough, that defense didn't really hold up well in court. After he realized he couldn't even keep a job at Baskin-Robbins because of his criminal record, he got back to stealing after receiving a seemingly solid tip from a friend. Of course, we learned later it was all a setup orchestrated by brilliant scientist Hank Pym to test Scott and then get him involved in his quest. But why choose Scott Lang? It seemed like Hank put a lot of effort into getting Scott on his side specifically, despite ultimately not knowing anything about him except what he had read about his crimes. And to make this an even crazier coincidence, he has a daughter who was not only better qualified than Scott, but had a way better suit. When Hope questions her father about this very point, it's kind of lamely explained that Hank Pym fears losing Hope, especially after losing her mother. So why was Hope trained in combat in the first place if her dad never intended for her to be a hero? It just doesn't seem to make sense why Hank chose Scott specifically to be the new Ant-Man, especially in light of the fact that he had an already more qualified superhero at his disposal. But what if Scott Lang was able to travel back in time and meet Hank Pym at some point in time? Doctor Strange had access to the Time Stone between the events of Doctor Strange and Infinity War, but for all we know, Scott may also have traveled through time. During the mid-credit scene of Ant-Man and the Wasp, we saw Scott travel into the quantum realm while his associates looked on. Before he left, Janet Van Dyne, who had just spent ages living in the quantum realm, warned him to be careful of time vortexes. This seemed like a throwaway comment at first, but we decided to give it a second thought following the decimation. Everyone who knew Scott was in the quantum realm and had the ability to get him out suddenly vanished when Thanos snapped his fingers, and as far as we knew, there was no way to get out of the quantum realm without some outside assistance. Is it possible that those time vortexes are more relevant than we thought? Could Scott have used them in order to make his escape? We know he gets out somehow since we've seen him unexpectedly show up during the trailer for Avengers Endgame. At some point after the events of Infinity War or in Endgame, he may have ended up face to face with Hank Pym at another period in time. During Ant-Man and the Wasp, Scott was able to convince Hope and Hank that he had contact with Janet by describing some of her memories. It's possible that with the inclusion of time travel in the MCU, it's now possible for future events to influence the past. This could prove to be an important part of the MCU going forward. Why time travel? Well, first of all, it finally exists in the MCU and we've seen characters utilize it before. Second of all, how else are they gonna undo the decimation? Because that's kind of a big deal, especially with Spider-Man Far From Home getting ready to hit theaters following Endgame. We are kind of going to need Peter Parker to not be a pile of dust for that one. In addition to Janet Van Dyne's comment about time vortexes, we've also seen some Endgame set photos which make it look like our heroes are revisiting the Battle of New York. Even the latest trailer seems to show Tony Stark and Steve Rogers reunited at the site of this famous battle. And let's not forget that time manipulation was a surprisingly huge part of the movie Doctor Strange. It was easy to forget this amongst all of the flashy magic, but we did learn a lot about the importance of time and then how it motivates the actions of characters in the MCU. Caecilius claims time kills everything, but less destructive characters don't see things this way. The Ancient One claims that while people can't choose their time, death is what gives life meaning. It's actually a pretty familiar argument to Marvel fans. Vision makes a similar speech to Ultron in Avengers Age of Ultron. Sure, our heroes can use plot devices like the Time Stone or time vortexes in order to manipulate time, but this doesn't necessarily make the time they use to experience their lives more or less valuable and meaningful. Despite being able to explore all possible futures and manipulating time, the Ancient One still placed a great value on her life. When her time on Earth grew short, she desperately tried to hold out until the last possible moment. There are also some ways in which time manipulation can backfire. Wong and Mordo warned Doctor Strange that this could happen, and Dormammu learned the consequences of messing with time firsthand. The dreaded being was forced to spend an extended amount of time with Doctor Strange. Oh, poor thing. Among the other consequences mentioned were unstable dimensional openings, spatial paradoxes, and time loops. Doctor Strange was also informed that temporal manipulations can create branches in time. If our heroes do use time travel to affect previous events in the MCU, this could leave them in a universe that's forever changed. The universe of Marvel comic books has different dimensions which coexist, and it's possible the MCU will develop these as well. But it could be that the method of time travel used will affect the ramifications. If our heroes use the quantum realm in order to travel through time in Endgame, will the rules be different than if they were to use the Time Stone? Because we haven't seen our heroes use this method of time travel, it'll be interesting to see if the rules differ from those which occur when using an Infinity Stone. Maybe using the quantum realm will allow our heroes to change aspects of the MCU's history while minimizing any sort of butterfly effect from taking place. What do you think about the idea that time travel could explain certain events which have taken place in the MCU up until this point? Let us know what you think in the comments section, and then click on the subscribe button for more videos from us here at CBR. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next time.